Well, I'm going to welcome everybody to today's forum. I'm Dennis Cooley. I'm the Northern Plains Ethics Institute Director. My Associate Director is right here, Leanne Wolf, to back us up. This is the public forum that is the final segment of the Exploring Academic Freedoms, Freedom of Speech project of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute at NDSU, Tri-College University, Humanities North Dakota State Student Government, and the North Dakota State University College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. We've had a very interesting long series, and so we thought that since academic freedom and freedom of speech is going to be something that our next generations have to deal with, we should listen to students and how they think about it. Our moderator today is Chris Wilson, who is NDSU's President's Chief of Staff, and he is currently working on his graduate degree in education at NDSU. So he fulfills two roles here. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dennis. I just want to thank the NPEI for doing this. I mean, academic freedom, freedom of speech is fundamental to what we do at a research university. It's kind of implicit in all of our operations, but for something that's so important to what we do, it's also really unclear what it is. And there's so many ambiguities associated with it. I mean, other than who it covers, what it covers, and where it comes from, we have a pretty good understanding of it. So, you know, having debates on college campuses about what it means is going to be is very important, because academic freedom has mattered for a long time. It's going to matter a lot more in the coming future as our society becomes more polarized. Universities will be on the front lines with regard to a lot of topics, and understanding the scope of what our students and faculty and staff can do is going to be critical to have, making sure that those conversations continue on better for years to come. So I just want to thank the NPEI for having this conversation. We're joined by four panel members, and to my right, Luna Zahar. I appreciate it. Luna is a senior at NDSU, double majoring in political science and international studies with an emphasis in pre-law. Go lawyers. Lawyer before I was chief of staff. Seth Lumley is a junior majoring in political science and minoring in pre-law. More lawyers, good. I'm the only person you'll hear that says the world needs more lawyers. You don't get that a lot, but they really do. Carter Eisinger is a mechanical electrical engineering student at NDSU and will graduate in the fall of 2022. So congratulations, just really close. Joy Dowling is a fourth-year student, a pharmacy major with a minor in business administration. So we're going to open with comments from each of the panelists, and then we'll go into a discussion. The event is being taped, so I'll remind everybody that this is being recorded. And if you have any questions or want to say stuff to the panelists, please use the chat function through Zoom. So with that, I don't know if the panelists have made a decision with regard to who's going first. I'll turn it over to the panelists.
Oh yeah, that's right. So my name is Carter Eisinger, and like you said, I'm a double major in mechanical and electrical engineering. Been involved in student government for a while, so just the whole realm of like worrying about this type of thing has been kind of on my mind lately. I did prepare a bit of a presentation. Being the engineer that I am, I love presentations. I'm sure everyone is sick of seeing them though, so I'm going to skip using that presentation, just kind of talk some of my points from here. So the first thing I want to talk about, just kind of setting up some background, is the Challenger explosion. Challenger explosion on January 28th, 1986. We strapped 7 people on top of a rocket, launched them into space. 75 seconds later, that rocket unfortunately exploded and all 7 people were killed. So why did this happen? There was an O-ring failure. This O-ring failed and led to this explosion. The thing you might not know about the O-ring failure is that it was known to the engineers, it was known to the administration at NASA that it's potential that this could have failed. Those warnings were ignored. And I think the lesson that we can take from that in regards to freedom of speech is that it's cause for us to pause, slow down and listen, and thoroughly hear all perspectives on the matter. The engineers said it's possible this might happen. The administration says, no, we have to go ahead. We've put a lot of money, we've put a lot of effort into this. It would be embarrassing to have to cancel. And again, I just think it's a good opportunity to stop and make sure that we are considering all angles to a subject. Moving on, coming back a little closer to home, in the North Dakota Constitution, if you didn't know, North Dakota, along with the United States, has a constitution. In Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights of our Constitution, it says, every man may freely write, speak, and publish his opinions on all subjects. Now that's great. That's very much in line with the First Amendment of our United States Constitution. But let's go on to see what the rest of the North Dakota Constitution has to say. It says, being responsible for the abuse of that privilege. And at a very high level, I'll bring this back down to academic freedom later. But on a very high level, I think this shows how we are to use our freedom of speech, how that concept applies to you as an individual. You aren't speaking into a vacuum. Usually when you have something to say, like I do right now, I'm trying to say that to somebody, and I'm responsible for what I say, and those around me can't hold me responsible for that. So at NDSU, Stanley Fish came several weeks ago to speak. I unfortunately was unable to attend that presentation, but after the fact, I was able to do some research, and I spent 2, 3, maybe it was 4 hours watching some of Stanley Fish's videos. And that was very interesting. Stanley has a lot of ideas that I had not been exposed to before. And after watching for 4 hours of his content, I was able to, I think, boil down his arguments into one simple statement, a statement that he himself made. The statement is, students don't have rights. I'll put in parentheses, in the classroom. That's what he means, in the classroom in an academic setting. So I'll repeat that, students don't have rights. He loves to say that in a way that shocks people. Students don't have rights, what are you talking about? Like, you don't exist, you aren't a person. He uses that statement with a lot of gravitas, and I appreciate that. It makes people think. My interpretation of what he means, though, is that those who are deemed to hold the truth are the only ones allowed to disperse it. Again, this is my summary. I'll repeat it one more time. Those who are deemed to hold the truth are the only ones allowed to disperse it. And this is where it comes down to an academic freedom question. In the classroom, Stanley Fish believes that the instructor, the professor, in whatever setting, they're someone who spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of writing and study on their subject of choice. And they are, in some respects, considered to be a master of that. Of course, many of our professors literally are masters or even doctors by degree. So that's where Stanley Fish is coming from. I'd like to leave my statement here with a couple of questions. So what does that mean for us? Academic freedom, the idea that a professor, a master, an expert, so to speak, holds the truth and is deemed able to disperse that truth. Have you ever spoken up to correct a mistake in class? Being an engineer, I can certainly say that I have. Sometimes my classmates who constantly are speaking up in class and correcting mistakes, they can get on people's nerves a little bit. They make the class go long, but it's absolutely something that happens. Moving on from there, have you ever said anything on campus that someone else may disagree with? I say on campus kind of as a caveat. This is something we can discuss with my panel mates later, whether academic freedom applies only on campus or off, but I'm kind of sticking with the on campus here. Has anyone ever said something that you disagree with on campus? I'm going to guess the answers to both of those questions are yes for any of us. Certainly true for me. Do you want someone to marginalize and silence your opinion, even if it means you get to marginalize and silence the opinion of others? Finally, do you believe that you should be held responsible by your peers exercising your right to freedom of speech? For example, I could walk into the student gov office and say to Seth, Seth, you look especially well dressed today. That is something I could commonly say on a daily basis. I could also walk into the student gov office and say, Seth, you're looking, no, I can't handle that today. Does he have the right to take offense at that, not want to talk to me anymore? No offense. But just as a point of example, do I have the right to be held responsible by Seth, by others, for using my right to freedom of speech? And to sum that up, or to finish that off, should the university hold you responsible? And as the first speaker, I don't mean to set the direction of the conversation too much, but I think that is an important point to make. Being able to be held responsible by your peers for exercising your right to freedom of speech versus being held responsible by the university or the state university for freedom of speech. So I'll leave you with that. pass the baton on to Mr. Seth Lumley.
Well, I'm Seth Lumley. I'm a political science major. That's a very difficult act to follow. One of the things that I would like to focus on is in recent years, there's been a lot of focus on hate speech and what policies should be towards like even what that is. And the problem with targeting a specific area of speech like hate speech is there's not really a concrete definition. Whereas with free speech, I feel like there is a much more clear definition. Obviously, some of it is up to interpretation, but we've had a lot more time to interpret free speech and what that really means and what that should look like. My issue with something like hate speech is how can you know something is wrong unless you discuss it? And that's really what free speech is all about, is being able to let all ideas come into the light and let society determine which ideas are really worth carrying forward and which ideas are maybe deserve some stigmatization, like racism and things like that. And over the course of our country's history, we've certainly gotten better at determining which factors or which areas of speech are societally unacceptable. But just because something is societally unacceptable does not mean that it should be banned by, say, a government action. Like, for example, there have been multiple speakers across college campuses across the country that have their presence has caused some of the students on these campuses to engage in quite illegal activities, I'll say, like riots and breaking property and things like that. And should those speakers then be held responsible for the actions that are caused as a result of them coming and giving a speech that has nothing to do with rioting or anything like that? And I would say the answer is probably no, because academic freedom is one of those things where that extends to student organizations. And I think all organizations on campus should be allowed to bring in controversial speakers, just if for no other reason than to spark conversations to advance free speech in general. And another scary thing about not having the First Amendment, which would be possible, is then who gets to decide what speech is allowed? And Carter kind of touched on this. Without the First Amendment, there's really no safeguards against just banning speech that you find to be egregious or maybe some controversial political opinions. You could just very easily ban them without the First Amendment. And I guess that's where I'll leave my section. That's kind of all I wanted to cover. Carter did a much more in-depth job, but I will pass it on to Joy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joy Dolan. I am currently a pharmacy student here at North Dakota State. And my biggest, when seeing this panel and being excited about it, I started thinking about my book club that I was just recently a part of, where we talked about dictatorships. And we talked about a majority of the dictatorships that we've seen around the globe. And one of the biggest takeaways was the freedom of information in all of those countries, freedom to say what you want, freedom to read what you want. The media that you watched was all taken away. That was one of the first moves that these people in power decided to do. And it kind of sparked me to think, why would they do that? Why is that control over what people are saying, what ideas in general are? Why is that something that is always taken over and taken away? And I believe that is just because when people have the ability to seek out knowledge and to seek out truth, they often can overpower and take away the power from a dictator. And so I think that is why our conversation here today is so relevant and so powerful, is because when and academic freedom and being able to share ideas limits people's power. And it allows knowledgeable people make educated decisions. And I once heard a quote is, uneducated people do what they are told. Educated people question what they're told. And that is what academic freedom on college campuses means to me, is being able to ask questions and being able to push back against your professors and say, hey, I don't think my research or what I've done in my research has backed that up. Can you explain more about it? And that's why it is so powerful. And we need to, in my opinion, that's one of the biggest things that I see as a consequence of limited academic freedom. And I think Seth kind of touched on it, like who gets to decide what is true? And in often many of these countries, they don't get to make that choice. That choice is made for them. They're forced down on what truth is. And so I think that's why our discussion and being able to keep academic freedom and being allowed all ideas to be heard is in the benefit of all people in a nation, especially in a free nation like ours.
Well, I guess I'd like to offer a different point of view. I definitely think that there's a difference between academic freedom and free speech. I think free speech is harbored on the campus, while academic freedom is harbored in the classroom. Free speech protects academic freedom, which protects academic discourse. And I think that there is a fine line between the two. You can go out and petition as long as you're not disrupting any classroom on the campus. That is your free speech. But I think when you're having these conversations within the classroom, that is a whole entire new subset of discussion. We should be able to ask these hard questions. We should be able to probe a new school of thought. We should be able to do all of these things without facing any consequences from the university. And the university can offer those consequences if you are doing those things on campus. We've had a lot of things that have happened in the dorms, in Union, stickers placed up on campus, but that is not happening in the classrooms. That's not academic free speech. And I think free speech within a university, there is hate speech. And I think that is true. How can we decide what is hate speech? And I think those societal norms of what we know is hate speech should have consequences. But I don't think when you're having those conversations within the classroom, there should be consequences. I think a lot of people should be able to discuss what they want to discuss. They should be able to research what they want to research without facing those consequences. There's different consequences within this campus and different consequences within the classroom. And I think that's really important to know. So a lot of students, they kind of see free speech and they kind of apply it all over campus. They see free speech and they kind of think hate speech is automatically protected when it's really not. And I think a lot of students have a hard time wrapping their head around that idea that hate speech isn't really protected on campus, and NDSU is a public university, so they can only do so much. So I just kind of wanted to talk about the academic freedom and free speech on campus.
Oh, fantastic. I'm going to pick up on Luna's issue with regard to the context matters. Because you have freedom of speech, does that mean that you have freedom of speech everywhere? When Stanley Fish says you have no rights, does he mean that you have no rights as a student in the classroom, or does he mean that you have no rights on campus? And are those different issues?
I mean, I think something we might want to even agree on a little bit is maybe what we're coming from with freedom of speech and academic freedom. We've all kind of touched on that. I think for the most part, I could summarize that. We agree that people should be able to express their opinions. And as Luna said, like in a classroom setting, you should be able to tackle hard issues. You should be able to discuss that. That should be protected. And I fully agree with that. And then we run into the issue of we have hate speech, as some people define it, things that are patently offensive to certain people that are being said. How do we deal with that? Do we deal with that? Is that something that the university deals with? Is that something your peers deal with? Perhaps we even take it to the government level. Is that something that government deals with? And that maybe kind of redirecting the conversation to that. I'm not saying anything about it at the moment, but maybe that's the direction we take the conversation of who has authority over what speech.
Yeah, and kind of touching on that, you mentioned like stickers and things like that. I mean, I guess I would view the placing of a sticker on personal property would obviously be different than putting a sticker on campus property, because you don't own that building, and the owners of that building have certain rights to limit what's placed on it. That would honestly be vandalism. And touching on like there are some limits, especially on the university, like if you were to target a specific group of people, that's harassment, and that could be even discrimination depending on what position you're in and what you're doing. So I think that is sort of separate, like a separate issue from free speech almost, because it's already kind of covered by the law.
So if you have a chemistry class versus a political science class, do you have the right to express your opinions with regard to a war or some current controversial issue as a student for an unlimited amount of time in your chemistry class?
I think as far as legality and morality goes, yes. On the flip side, as someone who is paying your professor to run that class, I think the professor probably has the right to say, shut up and get out of my class, I'm trying to teach chemistry. Like, freedom of speech doesn't mean that I can walk into your living room and yell at you. Like, you have the right to like control your living room, so to speak, and I'm kind of making a poor metaphor here. It doesn't mean that anyone can, if you're not the one in control of that space, I think there are things to consider. That's not to say that that speech about the war would be stopped anywhere else. You could go on the street, you could go on the sidewalk, and as passerbys walk by, you say, here's my opinion on the war. I hate this, I love whatever it is. Like, your freedom of speech is protected there. And in the classroom, the government doesn't have the right to come in and say, I don't like what you're saying, you need to stop. But in that classroom setting, that's not what you're there for. Like, what about the professor's freedom of speech to talk a little bit louder than you and to continue with this chemistry lecture? Well, we have a problem now, let's figure it out.
And I think that also speaks to, just because you have the right to say something does not mean you should, and it's also taking into account the responsibility piece. Yes, you technically, I think you have the right to start saying that, but your professor, as Carter said, has the right to respect is responsible to not just you, but all of the other students in that classroom who are also paying for that service. So it's not saying that you couldn't say it or that you should be punished for saying it, but that knowing the appropriateness of when to, as an individual and respecting other people, I think that's what it really comes down to. Like you have the liberty to do so, but then with that liberty comes responsibility.
And also to touch on that, I mean, I think when you sign up for a class, you're kind of just by proxy of signing up for that class, you're kind of agreeing to certain terms within that class, which are like listening to your professor, staying on topic, that sort of thing. So since you're agreeing to that sort of in advance, I think it would be wholly legitimate for the professor to be like, no, you need to stop talking about this. This is on topic. We need to stay on the subject.
And I'll kind of go back to even the North Dakota Constitution. I think it's a fantastic way that it said. To repeat the first part again, every man may freely write, speak, and publish his opinions on all subjects. Doesn't say every man has the right to an article in the H4. It doesn't say every man has the right to post a poster on the side of the Memorial Union. Like, those are things you have to get permission for from other people. That's not stifling your freedom of speech. I suppose we could go that direction, but I don't think we're going to argue that like spray painting my opinion on a building is legal. Like, that's pretty clearly not right. I think there are public contexts in which you are essentially allowed unlimited freedom of speech. Those contexts being, in many cases, of public property. If I go to a state park, like, who has jurisdiction over me in that state park? It's the state. Can the state tell me what and what not to say in the state park? I don't think so. Like, if you're talking about unlimited free speech, take it there, take it to a road, take it somewhere where you aren't under someone else's jurisdiction, such as this building where someone like Paul Ralsted could say, hey, I don't want you like screaming in the hallways. There are people trying to study. He has some jurisdiction over this building.
I think the idea of, I kind of feel like we're cherry picking a little bit on what is acceptable and what is not now. And I feel like with academic free speech in the setting of chemistry and political science, in both of those classes, you have facts within those. But I think it's important to also really note the facts, understand the facts, and you should be able to discuss those facts, those theories, those possibilities beyond that, within limitations of your professor as well.
Does the professor have a right to be a bad professor? can a professor go into the class, say a geography class, and say the world is flat? Is that permissible? Does that professor enjoy that level of academic freedom to go in and teach something that's against the majority consensus of that area's teaching?
While I think they might have the right to do that, I think they would probably struggle to actually get the job if that's what they were going to do. So I don't think that would ever actually happen. I mean, I guess it could, but I guess I think that they would probably have the right to do that, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be consequences from, say, the university for doing that.
One of my favorite things to do is turn questions on their head. So I'll kind of restate that question and then maybe as just a point. Would we allow Galileo to come on campus, walk into our campus and talk about there being a round Earth? He's probably got a bit of evidence, he's got things to back him up, but it goes against, putting ourselves back in the 1500s or whatever it was, maybe it was earlier. If we were having this discussion in the 1500s, would we allow Galileo on campus? I sure hope we would, because that would enlighten us. And I think giving him the opportunity to speak, given his opportunity to present his evidence and convince us that the Earth is round, I think that would probably be what all of us would want. If we had someone coming on the campus saying the Earth is flat, like, yeah, I'm gonna laugh. I probably won't go to his lecture, but maybe I would just see, does this man have anything? Maybe he has some weird point about North Dakota is flat and it being the world. I need to understand all of the context that I can around that.
I think he was talking specifically about like a professor coming.
Well,
Like
Professor,
during their class.
sure. Professor, speaker, I guess we could get into whether there's a difference between a professor paid by the university or a speaker, but in my mind, it's pretty equivalent.
I briefly touched on this in my last, but I just said is that we need to follow those facts that have been set in place for us, and that we know is scientifically true or has been proven by history. And I think it's important to follow that truth through facts. And I think most of us know that scientifically the Earth was round and not flat. So I feel like we just using our facts, we can obviously eliminate that professor's possibility of working at the university.
What does that mean? If there should be a distinction between, so-called hard sciences and liberal arts? If a professor comes in and says that water freezes at 52 degrees Celsius, that is one truth, but Dennis's world or Professor Cooley's world of philosophy is one where there's lots of arguments and hard to mathematically disprove things. So how does one deal with the world when it's not as objective?
I think being from a very objective major where I think you do really have to balance and trying to find facts and encouraging professors to back up what they say with evidence. That is one of the things that we are taught every day is you go back to the guidelines of what studies have shown, what this medication will work for this. And so I think you do definitely want to be careful of who, in a hard science, how you want to portray truth. Whereas like you mentioned, in a philosophy major, it might be a lot easier to have more open discussion because in my major, you could really hurt somebody if you're not doing something based on fact and based on evidence. But in the sense of free speech, I still think that professor has the right to share their opinion. And I think the biggest issue that I see is not allowing a student to share theirs. It's just balancing and having open discussion. I think that is the biggest piece. And I think if a professor comes in and starts spouting about how something works, whether it be mechanical engineering, pharmacy, political science, and then not allowing a student to come and bring them evidence and say, okay, so tell me about this study or tell me about why you actually believe that. I think that's the biggest piece that I see is just allowing for discussion to happen between a student who's actually coming here for education and the faculty member.
quite firmly believe that we are all better off when we consider as many viewpoints as possible. It's hard, yes, we live in the age of information. There's a lot of information coming at us, and sometimes that can be a problem. But say I were a student at NDSU doing research in engineering, and I discovered a new technique, and I developed a new plastic, say, and a professor doesn't like it, doesn't appreciate it, like encourages me not to go forward, just doesn't like what I have done. I could take that somewhere else, develop it, it's great. But if I wouldn't have had to do that, if I could have just been an NDSU and pursued something with the academic freedom of doing what I want to do, doing what I see as best, it would have been better in the long run because I would have been able to develop it here. And this is kind of, plastics are a long way from free speech. Like just the point of that academic freedom, I do believe having that is the best way forward.
Do you believe that in the classroom, officials comment about students having rights, do you believe that the faculty member and the teacher have equal rights in the classroom? Or does one have more rights as far as control, speech, and the other? And
Students versus.
students versus
Okay.
faculty in the classroom. Are they equal? Or is there a different power position? And if so, what is it?
I think that there definitely is a different power position. I think from what I have seen in my own classroom, I think that students have a lot more academic free speech than professors on campus. There's been times where I have seen professors kind of struggle through a difficult conversation where a graph or facts may be put up and the student provides a different perspective. And the professor has just kind of had to move on while the student is allowed to continue their opinion. So I do believe that there's a different power dynamic in the classroom.
I think a lot of what the professors sort of control in the classroom is when students are allowed to share their opinion. Because obviously if the professor is giving a lecture, you're not allowed to just stand up and start spouting your viewpoint. That's obviously disruptive to the class. And that kind of goes back to what I said earlier about when you sign up for a class, you're agreeing to certain terms. And that would obviously violate those terms. But sort of what you said, I would agree that at least in political science, all of my professors have done a really good job at sort of separating what they're teaching, which is obviously political, and what they actually believe. Like, I don't actually know any of my professors' political opinions, like at all, which is honestly probably a good thing. But I could tell you a few of my classmates' positions just off the top of my head, and I've never actually had conversations with them directly about it, but I'm just kind of able to tell. So yeah, just kind of touching on that. I think students have a lot more academic freedom or free speech to say what they want, but professors sort of control when they can say it, at least in terms of the classroom.
Do you think that when you say that the students have more freedom of speech, do you think that's because they're self-censoring themselves or because of a legal restriction? Or what do you think is causing the students to have more freedom of speech than the faculty are enjoying?
I think that there probably are some restrictions. I'm not sure if it'd be legal or not, but at least on the university level, I'm sure there are some restrictions, especially in a subject like political science, about, you know, if you're allowed to, because obviously a political science professor is a figure of some authority in the subject. So if they stood up and started saying that a particular political opinion was fact, and that's the absolute way that it is, I think they would run into some issues with the university, so.
I want to build off Seth's point, because that was a lot of what I wanted to say as well, is I think faculty have a responsibility to students to be more objective, and that they have the responsibility to teach different viewpoints, because that's why you're going to college, is to open up your mindset to new ideas. And I think having professors present you with facts and then give you projects and examinations and quizzes all to help support that viewpoint. And I think that's the biggest that I see is I think faculty are self-censoring themselves because they are trying to be respectful of that. respectful of that viewpoint, because that is their duty to students.
I think there definitely needs to be a level of respect from a student. Like if I go to a classroom and a professor is saying something that I disagree with, like I could say something and be too annoying, or I could just sit there and try to figure out what they're saying. Like I think it's on me as a student to self-censor in some situations. That should be my choice.
I definitely do think a lot of professors are self-censoring, kind of what was brought up earlier. I don't know a lot of my professors' political affiliations because they are just teaching us what we're there to learn. And I think that there was one incident where it was politics, where a student was a little uncomfortable with a research paper that we were supposed to read. And that student went to talk to the professor, and the professor kind of said, like, this is not hate speech. What we're learning is the research paper was kind of dictating or kind of around names. Ethnic sounding names are sometimes less hireable than white sounding names. And that was the paper, that was the research paper we were supposed to be looking at. And the student was uncomfortable, and the professor said it's always been on the syllabus, and kind of had like a little content warning at the beginning of class saying, this is not hate speech. What we're learning here today is the actual numbers and the stats behind this research paper. And so I do think that a lot of professors, just by seeing that one incident, a lot of professors are self-censoring because they don't want to deal with angry students and they don't want to deal with an angry university.
Also just want to build off that, like, should they have to deal with angry students in an angry university? As you said, they were agreeing to this in the syllabus, and they were, like Seth said, the group of rules. And so I think there needs to be a distinction between how someone takes something and what actually is going to cause somebody harm. You know, like, I think the protections under the general Constitution of the United States really do provide very good guidelines for how to approach that. And I think that definitely can be related to academic freedom on campus.
I'd like to switch gears just a little bit. Do you want me to be taking questions from the audience during the whole time, or is it supposed to be reserved to the end? I don't know.
Well, if you want, just whatever flows best.
Okay.
Thing.
So I'm not monitoring the chat.
We do have one in the chat and one is a link. We'll start off with Colton, addressing Seth. Seth, you talked about the definitions of hate and free speech, how hate speech doesn't have an exact definition, but free speech does. What would be that definition?
So the definition of free speech would be your right to express your opinion. I guess that's sort of a simplistic way to put it, but that's, I think, the best way to put it is just your right to express your opinion.
To follow up on that, that's an interesting question. So we all saw at least the reruns of a previous show for the younger people who saw it on YouTube or whatever. The Oscars this year, where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, which on one hand is just this peculiar pop culture incident, on the other hand, it's a criminal activity. But from a third action, the third angle I want to talk to about is, do words equal the physical? We're talking about free speech here. Is the trauma that's caused by a speech the equivalent of trauma that is caused by the physical? So did the comments that Chris Rock made justify the physical assault, or and is one harm equal or less or greater than the other?
I would say that I can't think of any instances where words would be sufficient justification for violence unless it's something like somebody is threatening you and you have reason to believe that they are going to follow through on that threat. So I think what Chris Rock did was nowhere near the level of a threat. So I think what Will Smith did was completely inappropriate and not covered under free speech.
I believe that there's a Supreme Court case, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, where it was a police officer and a citizen. And I think that free speech case came to say that you can say anything to a police officer as long as it doesn't insinuate harm. And so I think that's kind of, it's already out there as case law. And so kind of to discuss like, what is that harm? What can we say? What is not inciting harm? Is there a fine line? There must be, because it's a case law. What do you guys think?
There's an old saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, and that saying is untrue, because words do hurt. That being said, I don't think that means that they're equivalent. I don't think in any way words are equivalent to physical violence. Yes, some people may be more susceptible to words than others. I've been more susceptible to harsh words at different times in my life, sometimes more so, sometimes I've had the thick skin and been able to deal with it. That being said, I don't think they're equivalent. We've kind of talked about like the threat of violence. The threat of violence, me saying like, I will harm you, that right there, let's block it off. That is not the harm. The harm is what I might do. Yes, very real. And you should take warning, or I should take warning. I should be able to be held accountable for threatening harm. That being said, that in and of itself, it's not equivalent to the harm.
There are types of harm that are not protected by the Constitution, that are just pure words that don't equate to physical violence, such as like slanderous accusations. But I do not think anything other than like slanderous accusation or a threat against oneself or one's family. I don't think there's really anything beyond that I can consider.
So hate speech, while protected, it doesn't cause harm or trauma.
I didn't say that it doesn't cause harm, but I don't think it should be protected, or I don't think it should be not protected by free speech.
Yeah, hate speech causes harm. That is true. I don't believe that the government should step in and prevent that. The government, of course, talking about academic here, trying to take it higher.
My biggest issue is then who determines what is hate speech. There has been many accusations on many different campuses who you can be incited as hate speech or be accused of hate speech very easily. And I think that causes people to self-censor and yes, you want some self-censorship to allow for responsibility. And nor do I agree with hate speech or want people to view it that way, but I think they do have the right to say those things.
If I can speak again on that, I think I'm going to go back to the Constitution one more time, but the last half this time, being responsible for the abuse of that privilege, things like hate speech. You should absolutely self-censor that. That should be something that I, as the individual, choose not to do. Hopefully it never gets to the point where I even have to think about that. It should be just natural for me as a member of society to not cause verbal harm to someone else. Like, that's just being a human being. I think it is in the Constitution that you are responsible personally for the abuse of your freedom of speech.
And sort of to touch on that, you don't always, like when you're speaking, you don't always know if something that you say might offend somebody. So being able to just be accused of hate speech, and then all of a sudden you don't have the right to say those things anymore. You didn't have any way to know ahead of time. You couldn't have self-censored it, even if you wanted to. So I think that being able to restrict or ban hate speech is kind of a slippery slope.
I guess I'll offer a different perspective. I do agree that it's hard to define hate speech. It's hard to punish hate speech, especially on a public university. There's a lot of rules that don't allow students to get punished, i.e. 2020 on campus. where students were not getting punished. But as, you know, a Hispanic woman on this campus, I would prefer not to see posters on campus or students outside telling me to go back to my country, saying just the most outrageous racial slurs against me. So, and I do feel like that would insinuate harm. That would, that's kind of a threat to me, to my people, and to a lot of other BIPOC students on this campus. But it is hard to punish those students. So you're right, there is a really fine line between, you know, you being a responsible person, and you being able to say that free speech and not knowing it offends people. But in general, the campus really can't punish students anyways for it. I would prefer not to see it on campus, and I wish that, you know, I think those rules have to come out of the North Dakota legislator and trickle down to campus. I believe they have to set that up. So yeah, I guess I would much prefer not to see those things on campus, but it's kind of, we can't really tackle those things on campus anyways.
Could you explain more what you mentioned the legislature? Would you explain more of what you'd like to see?
Well, I guess I'd like to see hate speech punished and taken more seriously. I guess the event I was referencing was the students who mocked the death of George Floyd, and it was caught on camera, and it happened in the high rises. And this was Halloween of 2020, I believe. And those students were not getting punished on campus because they couldn't. The university had their hands tied. They couldn't punish students for doing something in their own dorms. They couldn't punish them because they technically weren't breaking any code of conduct, and that code of conduct has to be created through, I believe, the North Dakota legislature, since we are a public institution.
And what would you like to see as a punishment, or what do you think those students have to do?
Well, I guess that's kind of, I'm not a higher educational professional, so I can't offer that point of perspective. But I remember when I was sitting on campus, and I saw this information trickle down, I was wondering why these students weren't getting expelled. It was something so atrocious and so difficult to look at and so difficult to be around campus, because there was a large divide happening on campus. And I just remember asking, why are these students getting expelled? And I feel like expulsion is no punishment. You should not be able to mock the death of somebody in general. That is a very harmful thing to do and a very hateful thing to do on campus.
Can I ask you a question then?
Yeah.
So what if they were mocking the death of a dictator, or mocking the death of someone who had done like Hitler?
I think I just said I don't think you should mock any sort of death.
Not at all.
No.
And then they should all be punished with expulsion then.
I think in this context, in what I
For
was
mocking any
saying,
death.
well, I was saying in this context though of hate speech, of this big incident that was happening so close to campus, that affected, I'm from the Minneapolis area, that affected a lot of people in my community and a lot of people in this community. That is a hate speech in the sense of race. I think with race, when you kind of go into that, you start looking at somebody's race and you start doing hate speech around that person and their culture and what makes them them. I think that appropriate actions do need to be taken, and I think those appropriate actions need to be set through somebody who understands higher education better than I do.
I guess I have something of a different opinion on that. I think the university did the right thing by doing nothing. But just because the university can't do anything or shouldn't do anything, or however you want to put it, does not mean that it isn't a good thing that they got exposed for what they were doing. Because I agree, I think it was wholly inappropriate. But at the same time, I think that they should have the right to do it. But just because they have the right to do it doesn't mean that we as a society don't have the right to then call them out for it and say that we think that it was wrong.
I wanted to add something. So Reed College has had big issues about freedom of speech in the classroom and actually shutting off classes, shutting them down. One of the things I haven't heard yet is, this is one of the arguments There's different privileges in our society in regards to speech. We are not coming at this as equal members in the marketplace of ideas, because some of us are incredibly privileged. We're privileged for different reasons. By the way, sometimes privilege is taken too much to extreme, and it doesn't make any sense. But there really is privilege. I, as a white man, have ability to say and do things that a lot of folks can't. I can get away with murder compared to the four of you because I'm a faculty member. And when Stanley Fish said you don't have freedom of speech, he's absolutely right. In the classroom, I can say things that you cannot say. And somebody can be mean to me, Chris will have a talk with me. But at the same time, it will come to, well, whatever. But the idea is, people have already had the argument is this, and I think it's an interesting one. You folks have already had your speech. When is it going to be time for these other individuals who haven't been able to speak to be the person who gets to speak publicly and the only one who gets to speak publicly because their voices have been drowned out forever? So that's one of the arguments that the Reed College students were given. What do you think? Does privilege have anything to do with these measures?
I wish I could lean into a microphone, so instead I'm just going to talk slightly louder. That's why we need to protect their freedom of speech so that everyone's voice is heard. I'm not going to get into, I don't want to get into the discussion of the privilege and stuff. I believe that when it comes to freedom of speech, that's why it's unilateral. That's why it's not mentioned that in the North Dakota Constitution, it's not said that those who are experts on the subject are allowed to talk. Those who are older are allowed to have allowed to have a better, bigger say. This is the reason why we protect freedom of speech. It's to protect the rights of the minority from the will of the majority.
But even what you said, when you said it for the Constitution, what does it say? It says man.
That's correct. Do you believe that it means man, only man?
I think when it's written, it meant man. We've extended it, but it'd be nice to actually have person or something along those lines.
I think that it's to kind of address your question of like, when is it the next people's turn? I guess I don't look at it as a zero-sum game. I think that just because I already frequently use my freedom of speech does not prevent somebody else from using their freedom of speech as well. So I guess that's where I would stand on that question.
I'm kind of a believer in if you want something and you want to go after things. I'm not saying that some people will have 6 barriers in their way and somebody else might only have 1. But I do think if there's a will, if there's a way, and if you want to express yourself, that you can. And we've seen many stories throughout history that of people who kind of came from a very not privileged background and have been able to rise up and make their opinions known. And I think it's a matter of allowing those people to speak. And I think they are allowed, as history has shown.
I would like to offer a different point of view. I think it's really easy to tell someone just to like speak up. But there's a lot of obstacles put in place. I think with the protests that actually happened on campus due to a lot of these events, I feel like that group of students in specific felt like they had a harder time organizing that protest because there was already a lot of backlash on Black Lives Matter protests in the area. So those students felt as if there were a lot of obstacles and it was hard for them to put on that protest. And there was a lot of faculty, staff, students that didn't want that protest to happen. And it was hard, but they were able to do it. And I think it's really difficult. I think in history, we have seen a lot of voices get suppressed from privilege. And I think that privilege does make it easier for people to speak up.
I would agree with your statement. Privilege does might make something easier for one, but then I don't think anyone is of equal privilege, no matter what. Like there's no set group of people who is like even, I think everybody has a different level of privilege, and it depends on what community as well. Like different people of different cultural backgrounds, maybe here in the United States are going to be different than they are going to be in Europe, and they're going to be different than they are going to be in South America. or just more context to it. I think it would just depend on the situation. Who has more privilege.
I think in America, there's definitely, and we go to a predominantly white institution as well. So I think in this context, within this community that you're referring to, I think that it's easier for persons of privilege to speak up rather than the minority students on campus.
Great topic, great conversation. I'm gonna switch gears a little bit on this one, just that probably going to an area that's pretty boring. But academic freedom covers 3 areas. It is it really, people don't know what it applies to the institution from the faculty. There's an open question whether it's an individual or it's an institutional right, but it covers 3 areas. And we really dominate the conversation with one of those areas, which is the classroom setting. Who has freedom of speech in the classroom, who has the ability to speak. The second area is the area of research. And that's an area we haven't really talked about much. Is, who should have the ability to research and what limitations should be put on those. And I don't know if this class has discussed much in the area of research. So I'm throwing out right now whether or not this is, I've got some scenarios I could throw, but I didn't know if I just throw it out to the panel for any discussions that you may have had or thoughts you may have with regard to freedom of research and publication, associated with publication.
I think one of the first ones that I was thinking about prior to this panel was the Planned Parenthood research that was happening on campus, or the research funded by Planned Parenthood. And that received a lot of backlash on campus. And there was an SB bill that went through that ultimately kind of eliminated that research. It was funded through Planned Parenthood, so it's a little bit of a different approach because they weren't picking that topic to research on. And I feel as if those students felt like they were being robbed of an opportunity that was given to them, and it was research that they should have been able to continue. It was research that they had to stop. They couldn't continue it anymore. And so I feel like that Planned Parenthood research funding was a big topic last spring.
Just going to clarify a little bit on that, because I'm very familiar with that one. The funding came from federal government. It wasn't, there came to NDSU, and then there was some of the money went to Planned Parenthood. The money didn't come from Planned Parenthood. It wasn't students, it was a couple of faculty members, and they weren't obligated to stop the research. They've been doing that research. One of the faculty members had already left a while ago, another one opted to, the grant expired, and she opted not to continue it, and it has since left and went to another university. So the university did in fact protect academic freedom for years. So just want to clarify that for the record. But you're 100% spot on that. SB 2030 touched on significant areas of academic freedom when it comes to the research. Great job.
We could speak up a bit. I think they're having trouble hearing us online. I know our setup is a bit far away.
Almost nobody's ever accused me of not hearing. And Tyler, I see there's a bunch of chats over there. Are there questions?
Yes, I was going to state that Kim Rogers posted a link with the New York Times. Just people want to take a look at that, just relevant thoughts. Let's pull up the link here. Title being why critics of angry woke college kids are missing the point. So it's just getting into stuff on campus with the classrooms. As well as, I don't know who this is, AMC Publications just posted the Holy Quran offers guidance on proper and effective use of freedom of speech. Lots of different quotations throughout it. But I guess I'll throw this your way. What basis does religious expression or the use of religious tenets, does that have any bearing? Can a professor kind of use their ideas within the classroom, whether that be for political science or ecology, something like
I guess I'll go first. So for that, I think it somewhat depends. Because as the professor, they do have some responsibility to remain impartial. However, I guess where I would draw the line is, yes, they should be able to practice their own religion within those contexts. I don't think that within the context of a classroom, they should be able to try to preach their religion unless they're teaching like a religion class and they're just on that subject.
I think it kind of goes back to agreements that you're making with the student in the syllabus. If you are writing that this is what you're going to be talking about, generally speaking, you should follow that. But I think you should be able to express your religion if appropriate, as long as it is expressed as your opinion. I think that's a big issue that I see with professors, like in my own coursework, because I'm in a very objective major. Many of my professors express different views than I do, and they do not express it as an opinion. Or they don't express this as a method to how something is, how an institution is functioning. And it should be expressed if there are other viewpoints of how that institution can be ran. And so making sure that anytime they're deviating from general research, because even research, we talk about it as nothing is proven. No, there really are no facts. There's only data, and what data can be backed up with other data. And so just making sure professors express when things maybe aren't as well supported, or that it is their opinion on their religion.
Well, separation of church and state. I do think that religion should not be brought into the classroom unless it provides academic discourse. And I think if it does, then it should be brought in as appropriately as it can.
I think at a very, very high level, the right to freedom of religion, freedom to express your religion is in some ways even more important than your right to freedom of speech, because to many people, their religion, it transcends things in this world. And I'm not going to get into that too much. As far as the classroom is concerned, I agree, especially with Joy, that it should be, when you say things relating to your religion, how you view the world, it just should be clear that this is how you view the world. Some people might not view it that way. Of course, you coming from your position, you do think you're the correct view, but you should state that. Like, that should just be part of what you say. Then your students can choose to accept or reject that, or talk to you more later if they want clarification.
Were there any other questions, Tyler?
We do have one more. Seth, this is a follow-up by Colton. He asked, when you say express your opinion, does that include all reasonable ways? For example, online posters, t-shirts. I think if there's something on the t-shirt you're wearing to class, stuff like that.
Yeah, so my general answer would be yes. But obviously there are some limitations on what sort of things you can wear in the classroom. Like, there is a dress code that you are, again, agreeing to when you sign up to these classes. So there are some limitations, but generally, yes, it's just generally your opinion on all methods.
I don't even know if I dare ask this one, because it's the questions I'm asking you, by the way, I'm actually working on a book. This is what the chapters is figuring out how this all works. And I thank you a great deal, because I actually have a sketch now to place these. But here's one of the issues. I've been trying to figure out how to go about doing this, or what to think about this. So suppose we get a group of folks who are so morally repulsive that most of us would just find them beyond the pale. So we're going to use NAMLA, North America Man Boy Love Association. They're pedophiles. And their motto used to be sex by either it's too late. They advocated for sexual relations between adult men and boys under the age of 8. So, by the way, I think there's no question this is morally wrong, what they were doing. Let's suppose we have a group on campus, a student group or other, wants to bring on the leader of this to talk about it. because this individual wants to bring these folks on campus, really does want free speech, no limitations. And I mean, this is no limitation. You get to say and do whatever you want here. What would you say? Would you say, yeah, or that we can't do this? Or is that going too far? Is this still protected by free speech? Because they're not going to sexually abuse any child, but they're going to be advocating for what they think is morally permissible behavior that all of us know sexually abuse children.
So I think that group does incite harm towards another group. And so I think under that context, in case law, I think that it would be appropriate to tell these people to not come on campus and that they're not invited on campus.
I think that, again, let's just kind of section off some things. We've got this speech that they want to exercise their freedom of speech. The speech in and of itself, drawing a box, nothing outside of it, that hasn't harmed someone. The thing is that the things that this morally repulsive group is doing, that should have been nipped in the bud far before they were at the point to bring this to a college campus. And I'm kind of diverting the conversation, I guess, but for something that morally repulsive, that should already be part of our legislative code, that these practices that this morally repulsive group is participating in, if you participate in those, there is going to be some sort of, like, they should already have some trial set, they should already be in prison, you know, whatever the circumstance allows. So again, I'm kind of sectioning off the free speech from the actions. I think the actions should have already been punished, and there shouldn't have even been like a path to ask the question of whether they're allowed on campus.
I guess sort of to build off of that, with that group, just to clarify, they openly advocate for specifically adult men to go and molest boys.
They don't think it's molestation. They think it actually is essential for boys to eventually develop the ability to love. They really do think that.
Well, I would say, depending on how they say it, that could just be considered a call to action, which is not protected under the First Amendment. So in that case specifically, I would say no, they should not be allowed on campus if I'm understanding the group correctly.
I would say, in essence of kind of more with what Carter has to say, in essence, the speech is not what is harming, it is the action that comes from the speech. And so I think also we've only talked about college students as primarily adults as well. And so I think children are a totally different category, and academic freedom for them in like a high school setting is totally different. But I think the speech itself should be allowed because of freedom of the idea, because even if we think it is morally repulsive, there were lots of, not saying that is not morally repulsive, it absolutely is, but there have been lots of ideas that people have been gotten put in jail, hurt for in the past that have been proven to be true. And so I think still allowing those ideas to come forth, not agreeing with the action by any means, they should still be allowed to say what they were going to say. But I do agree, like if you're openly saying that you're doing wrong, there should be more investigation into that before they even get here.
Really good sort of head with that one.
Yeah.
We had that at Miami, we had the Westboro Baptist Church. All heck ensued. Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road when you've got very, very controversial topics coming to campus. Yes, you want to acknowledge the First Amendment, but man, does your stomach churn at the same time? So, going back to that research thing, like, you know, academic freedom is, I guess, the best place to look for the kind of a definition is really that AAP statement from 1940, kind of sets it out. And it's interesting in there, they talk about when it comes to the teaching, It says teachers are entitled to freedom in the classroom. But when it comes to research, they use a different term. Teachers are entitled to full freedom in research. And they use the word full in front of research, or freedom when it comes to research, but not full in front of freedom when it comes to the classroom. Any ideas why they use that more important word in front of freedom when it comes to research versus teaching? Is teaching not as important as research?
I think knowing like medically, having the full freedom is any theory should be tested out because you never know what something might lead to or what two variables, how they might be connected in some way. And so I think in my context, that's how I view it, is full freedom in research is because you need to be able to explore any theory that might be applicable. And whereas like in the classroom, it's more meant to be a place to educate on what data is already showing.
I think I might kind of, maybe I'm changing the subject a tiny bit. But I'll kind of bring it back to, and I forget your name, but I'll kind of bring it back to the example you had. Say we had a teacher, a researcher on campus who wanted to conduct research on the subjects of the NAMBLA or NAMBLA. Would we, this is a morally repugnant field of study, like doing things in research that are morally repugnant to our society. If those actions are already banned by the legislature, say, I do not think that a researcher should have full privileges to conduct that immoral research. Continuing on from that, going back to, we were talking about the Planned Parenthood bill at North Dakota, or in North Dakota, to ban North Dakota State University from getting grant money from federal government or Planned Parenthood. It is morally repugnant to many people, including myself, to have abortions performed. And therefore, I believe that should not be an activity that is allowed to be undertook on our campus, because the things that they are doing, if they were doing some other, like if they were doing, say, stem cell research, and they're taking these stem cells and doing experiments with those without performing abortions, that's okay, good. But at no point do I ever want to see an abortion performed, because that is morally repugnant. And if that is already codified as being legal, that should not be research that is allowed to take place.
Sort of going somewhat in a different direction, I guess. I would think personally that the reason that they have freedom versus full freedom with teaching is because there are certain parameters that they have to meet and certain expectations that they have to meet as a teacher. Whereas with research, the goal is just to see where this takes you. So that would be, I guess, my.
As well, I feel like when you're walking into a classroom, there's already your syllabi that's already in place. There's already a topic set. So I feel as if professors will have to follow what's already instructed or what's already listed on that syllabi. While with their full research, they should be able to probe with different ideas, different schools of thoughts when they are conducting their research.
So let's imagine Dr. Cooley wakes up one day and says, I love philosophy, but I've just realized my true love is studying dangerous diseases. And he goes to his local medical store and buys the biggest vial he can of smallpox. And he goes to his office and is like, I'm going to do some research on smallpox. Let's just say a little dangerous. Should he be allowed to just do that research on academic in his office and endanger other people because of that and be covered by academic freedom? What are the parameters? You've already mentioned repugnancy as a standard. I'm not sure who gets to determine that level. So what are the standards by which research should be limited? Because on the statement, it says full freedom. Well, if we don't let dentists do with smallpox research, are we in fact giving full freedom? And if we're not giving full freedom, what are those limitations and who puts them in place?
So if I'm not mistaken, NDSU has an internal review board for experiments to make sure that experiments follow a code of ethics. And I guess one of the factors that goes into that is the potential benefit has to outweigh the potential harm. And I think probably that somebody buying a huge vial of smallpox and they're just keeping them in his office probably does not meet that standard, just off the top of my head.
Actually, I could, first of all, it's the military has the remaining ones. So you can't just buy some.
Okay, I pick another disease, I don't know.
No, we wanted to find something to kill people. This campus is full of them.
Yeah,
Because we do a lot of, I mean, it's amazing how we get off people. We don't like people to know that. We're gonna know ourselves. But,
Which you just are now recorded saying.
well, no, I have to
Edit
do
this out.
reports, but the institutional review board is for human subject research. So there's another one, which you're also right, has an ethics, that's IBC. So we have that, that's for the research with the sorts of diseases and things along those lines. So there's IACUC with animals. So yes, we are well covered. Everybody know, NDSU is following regulations on all of these.
Even just from a medical standpoint, I was trying to find it. We discuss ethics in research all of the time and making sure that when you set up, I think it's the Nuremberg Code, like just setting up rules in place to make sure that like it's not ethical. You cannot do randomized controlled trials, which are what prove causation in medicine on people that might cause potential death, or like they're very careful about how you set up certain trials. Is if you know that they can cause certain death, there's certain trial limitations that you can do, at least in human trials, unless the patient specifically agrees to those things and they have the autonomy to make that choice. So
is there anything besides danger that we should be considering when doing research? Should we consider limiting ideas?
not ideas. In research, I think the biggest thing is modeling harm to a patient, making sure they know the risks that they're taking when they're going through a trial process.
So when you say ideas, you might have a different idea of that than me. But what my mind goes to is maybe the morals, the ethics behind things that you would do. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit. I think having a review board is quite appropriate. There should be people that are looking at the experiments we do, people who have knowledge on the subject. But then in turn, those people should be held accountable by someone else, right? Whether that is a government legislature, whether that is just the people, maybe you make public your decisions. I really don't know the process for that, not being in the medical field or anything like that. I know in engineering, we have a class on ethics. It's all about how to not hurt people. Make sure you're doing your due diligence, make sure your math is right. Otherwise you get the I-35W bridge and the Atlas collapsing. Like, people are harmed when you don't follow through. So kind of lost my train of thought a little bit there, but I do think there has to be some accepted oversight on things like that research, on things like engineering a bridge that people will use every day. And we could maybe get into more of the weeds of what that looks like and how much power they have, and kind of, I guess, where that infringes on freedom. But there should be people that look at it, at least look at it and give you a thumbs up, thumbs down.
When the board gets to decide those limitations and those ideas, how do we decide that those people are well equipped to decide when an experiment is bad, when research is harmful? That's a very multifaceted question, I suppose.
And to your point, like when you say we shouldn't allow research of, you found it to be repugnant. The entity, who makes that decision, and then what is the repugnancy based on? I get that particular one. I'm talking about like on you were trying to set a rule up, saying what is that rule? It's dangerous, or is it because they're moral, ethically So I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
where that,
So-
because academic freedom and research, that's full freedom. It would seem that we'd have to have some really good rules with
Yes.
understanding that.
So I've kind of got a bit of a train of thought leading up to this, but I think what it comes down to is the general public, so to speak. Like where do you pull your morals from? You can pull your morals from like a single person, a small group of people. You can get things like a dictatorship or I believe oligarchy, if I'm getting my terms correct. Or of course, in this country, representative democracy, that people will send those to make laws who they believe represent them. And I think that is how the process should work. So when it comes to something like the NAMBLA or something like abortion, the people, the voting public will send those to, in our case, Bismarck, who make laws. Those people in Bismarck should represent the people here and apply the morality of the general public to our laws. So the legislature, when it comes down to it, is not going to be reviewing every individual experiment. They should delegate that duty to such a group that is approved by the legislature, who is then approved by the people. That's how you get your, so to speak, morality inserted into that review board.
Earlier during the panel discussion, you mentioned that Galileo challenged the status quo and said that there's a heliocentric solar system, which went against both theology and popular belief at the time. Should that have been allowed to be researched at that time?
I think that is something that, yes, should have been allowed to research. If an idea is true, and this perhaps could be a difference in belief between me and others, I believe that if an idea is true, it will win, so to speak, against ideas that are false. And this is maybe a very highfalutin, ideology kind of argument. But I think as Galileo conducts his research, he talks to his friends, his neighbors in the scientific community, and says, "Hey, look at my research." Of course, if his friends, his scientist friends, don't want to pay attention to him, then they're lost. If he's unable to convince people of that, like, we've got some very poor scientists, but I think everyone has within them some desire for truth. And I believe that will come out in the end.
Looks like there was another
Question?
8 down there, Tyler, or is that?
No, nothing else in the chat. Unless we have any questions in the room, we're getting close to our time if we want to do closing remarks.
I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody. this was a great conversation. I appreciate all the questions and all the answers. We're delving into some pretty tough stuff, and you guys have done a great job, so thank you very much.
Let's thank our speakers. And so I want to thank everyone for coming. When this is finished, Tyler will edit it. You folks will get to see it before it goes up onto our website. And so if you have any questions, I'm not sure if they'll take them, email, but you could try. After all, NDSU is an open university. We have free speech. So, anyways, have a great day. Thank you for coming.